Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the relevant radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
It's a gentleman's hour today on Trending. That means any question goes, questions you otherwise would maybe feel uncomfortable asking your mom or your sister. Like to hear answered from a faith-filled perspective. The number is 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask live on my Instagram story at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. We put a question box up there. Love to hear from you. Now, as we are diving into the topics for today's show, a little later on, we're going to discuss what's happening with the breaking news coming from Disney, their plans for your children, and what you need to know. This is an absolute bombshell. Hardly anyone's talking about it, so stay with me. We're going to dive into that. We're taking your questions during Gentleman's Hour. We'll talk about the consecration of St. Joseph and the significance of St. Joseph interceding in our lives. Joining me now is Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. He's the author of a number of books, including a book on St. Joseph and why we do what we do. And he was sharing with me the other night that he has the answer to the one thing that women want. Now, I semi-believe this because he was on a date with his wife last night and was totally ignoring my text messages, which I highly appreciate. He had his priorities straight. And join me, though, to dive into this topic. Gentlemen, listen, Devin Schadt has all the tips for men to help you understand that one thing that women want. Devin, welcome to Trending.
Thanks for having me on. Wow, that is an opening. What a setup.
Let's go ahead and dive in. I think that this is a striking topic that many people love, those hacks and those secrets, especially from a faith-filled perspective. So what have you figured out?
Well, that I don't understand women. That's the first thing. But I think a lot of times women definitely are a mystery, but we don't have to understand woman per se. We just have to understand really deep down what she wants. And I think that if we can understand what our wives want as married men or guys who are looking to get married and in hopes to get married, if we know this one thing, I think it makes all the difference in the world. And I think before we even go there, we just have to say it's not money, it's not muscles, it's not a treadmill, it's nothing like that. It's something so much deeper. But I think we have to, in a sense, go back a little bit to God's word, to the beginning, to understand God's design for woman. I mean, if that's all right, I'd like to just tap into that just a little bit. So, we remember the creation count. The first 3 days, God builds the framework, and the second 3 days, he fills it. But St. Thomas Aquinas has this axiom where he says, what's first in God's intention is last in his execution. And so everything is building up, and then finally God creates man. But woman is last. She is last in execution, which means she's first in God's intention. We see this really with Mary, too, as much with Eve. But the key here is that what is most precious, what is of supreme value, maybe even a bit vulnerable, is the pinnacle of creation, woman, Mary, Eve. Why? Because they're a life bearer. They're life-giving. They can do something that no man can do. And so that for that reason, Adam was given all these commands, to till and keep the garden, which in the Hebrew actually means cherish and protect. So he was called to protect and to cherish, to provide, all of that for Eve. But what's interesting is when Satan approaches and enters the garden, he doesn't approach Adam first because Adam's
Mhm.
alarm would have been on, but he approaches the
Right.
woman. Very smart. And why? Because he knows that Adam doesn't want to strain this relationship with this woman. He doesn't want to say no to his wife. And this is the key. Eve is tempted, and when she's tempted, it says in the scripture she turns and she gives the fruit also to Adam. Adam was right there. He was silent. And what do we see in this moment is that if we get into the psychology of it, Eve was looking for Adam to do something. She believed at that point that he was the sacrificial lover who the first thing that Eve saw when she was given life was a man rejoicing in her, Adam. And suddenly he goes silent. And so what does she
Mhm.
do? She reduces herself to seducing him, to manipulate him, to get some kind of response. And this is the key. Eve is subconsciously thinking, does he really love me? And the reason why is because he's not assuming his sacrificial responsibility. And this is the key. In our culture, we look around, we see women who are dressing seductively, doing a lot of things, posting all sorts of stuff on social media, whatever. But the reason is because they're really longing for the sacrificial love of the new Adam, Jesus Christ, in us men, to take sacrificial responsibility for them, to protect them, to cherish them. And
Mhm.
however, when they don't get that, then they reduce to seducing us, to get some kind
It's
of affirmation.
interesting, Devin, just to jump in, because as you're talking about this, I think you could even take two perspectives. I'd like to throw this in. One perspective is what you're sharing, where, Eve is having to use other means to gain the attention or attempt to, strike the need for protection from Adam, or we as women toward men. But perhaps also there's this moment where she's going, well, is this safe? Is this okay? Does this matter? I'm just going to keep proceeding
Yeah.
because you're not reacting, you're not doing
Yes.
anything. And so I will just proceed, and at a certain point it's like if you're standing on the front porch and you're waiting for someone to show up, and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you thought you were
Mm.
expecting them and they never show up. At a certain point you stop caring. And I think
That
that
is so
that is
true.
kind of
Yeah.
two perspectives, where on one end she was provoking to try and see if Adam would speak up, and on the other end at a certain point he didn't, so then she gave up.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's extremely powerful, and that makes great sense because where was Eve when God gave all the commands to protect the garden, to cherish the garden, to not eat from the tree? She was a twinkle in Adam's rib. I mean, she was a twinkle in Adam's eye. She didn't even exist at that point, which means that Adam, like you're saying, was responsible to communicate those commands from God to her. And so she's waiting. She's like you're saying, hey, aren't you going to do something here? Is this okay? What are we doing? And so it creates this division. And so she's really looking for Adam to step up. And I think, you look at, guys who've got classic cars, they store it, they protect it, they keep it in the garage, and then they bring it out on a nice sunny day. Or, they got this nest egg, they protect it. But that's, in a sense, we protect and we cherish that which we love the most. A shepherd doesn't put his sheep in between him and the wolf. He puts himself in between the wolf and the sheep to protect it. And I think that when a woman has a man who's willing to do that, he's willing to deliver himself up for his bride in so many different ways, self-giving, all of that, serving her, but also protecting her, that fills a deep inner need. So where we're lacking in other areas, it kind of fills that in a little bit. And it kind of fills her tank enough where she feels loved. She knows she's loved at a deep subconscious level.
Mhm. It's fascinating what you're saying, Devin. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. Find them at fathersofstjoseph.org. That's fathersofstjoseph.org. Devin, I keep thinking of a study that came out back in 2018 from the University of Kent and Iowa State University. And what it showed in that study is that women, no matter what economic status they are, and whether they're, home or not home, career women or whatnot, what they saw, especially within a group of women who focused on career, may or may not even be married, may or may not have children, that these radical feminists who took to ideologies of abortion, contraception, what the study showed from the University of Kent and Iowa State University is that women are hardwired to want what they referred to as the benevolent sexists. That is, the women, radical feminists, emphasize that they still wanted to be treated in a special way, lifted up on a pedestal, and ultimately have protection from the man they are with. And I thought that was so profound.
Yeah, that is awesome. And that's true. It's hardwired into us, And I think that, you look at St. Paul in Ephesians 5, he speaks to that in a way, even well before this study, but he says husbands are to deliver themselves like Christ delivered himself up for the church. And that word is paradokis in the Greek, paradokis. And actually it's the same word that Jesus used when he gave his disciples authority, or the same word in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, hey, when your son wants stone, you give him bread, paradokis. So it's this giving of oneself, this generosity, but it's also this sharing in authority. And so like if we understood this more deeply, the radical feminist side and all that, I think would kind of eventually wash away, because we men, we would really be doing our job. And I really think that benevolent effect that you're talking about, that desire to be protected and cherished, really deep down cherished, would really start to come up to the surface again. And women would feel safe again, and want to give themselves to their man in a very intimate way, because they're trustworthy. So I think really at the bottom line, like, why aren't we having intimacy, in our marriage? Why are we having communication problems? Why are we having all this? I think deep down, the man has, like in dancing, he's got to take the first step. He's not a better dancer. A lot of times doesn't mean he's a better dancer. He just has to take that first step of, self-giving love. And then she can move with that. And then pretty soon they've got this dance of self-giving love. And when they're dancing in that way, that spills out into the rest of the family. And I believe that this is really the key, is that sacrificial responsibility, initiating that.
That ownership that you're talking about, even within the context of the dance analogy that you're using, when a man leads, let's say in a partner dance, any type of ballroom swing, he leads, she follows, but he leads so that she follows. So at the same time, she can stylize and showcase her ability. So he makes her look good. And if you take it to the religious life, the virtuous life, you have that opportunity that when there's that proper context within marriage, within that relationship between male and female, there's a thriving between the two, the ownership, the protection, the provider dimension of the man, that provides provisions for the family, both physical as well as spiritual. That's where we see that shift. And it's fascinating, Devin, because I've seen this occur in various marriages where people have that and they're thriving, and you wonder what's going on. It's that communication, that collaboration, that gift of sacrificial love and following and leading that naturally occurs.
Yeah, I love that. That is awesome. You need to preach to men, but that is really, really good. I think when you're talking about the idea of showcasing her, in that dance, I love that, because that's what Joseph did for Mary. Joseph, it's beautiful, because after the Annunciation, all of God's commands for the Holy Family were to Joseph in dreams. And does that mean he was better? We know he wasn't better. We know that she was the pinnacle of the human race. Yet those commands were there for Joseph to showcase Mary, to showcase the Christ child, to highlight them, and do whatever he could, whatever it took to ensure that she was loved, she was protected, and she was cherished and provided for. And I love that. That's why I love St. Joseph. He's such a hidden hero.
That's Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. We're going to come back with Devin and dive into the topic of how to be a great dad. What needs to come first? I love diving into these topics from a faith-filled perspective, because so often you maybe find yourself floundering or wanting to do better. Well, we're talking about how that can be done. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie during our weekly Gentleman's Hour. We'll be right back, but we're taking your questions. Any question you have, gentlemen, 1-888-914-9149.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
It's our weekly Gentleman's Hour today on Trending. The number's 1-888-914-9149. If you have a question, we'd be glad to take it. Some great questions coming in, and I'm going to share with you breaking news coming out of Disney, meetings that they've had internally about what they have planned for your kids. Parents, you need to hear about this. And is it true? A story came out of Texas that a teacher claims that 20 out of 32 of her fourth graders have come out identifying as LGBTQ to her. We're talking about 10-year-olds. Believe it? Not believe it? I don't believe it, but we're going to talk about it a little later during the show. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Joining me now is Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. You can find them at Fathers of Saint, that's stjoseph.org. And we are diving into the topic of how to be a great dad. I think that there's a strong desire for every dad to be better than perhaps what he experiences, to be present and really help your kid thrive. But like most people, we're human and we struggle day in and day out. And I think that the great thing about our Catholic faith is that there's this constant check in, there's this constant challenge to do better, to ponder where are we struggling, how can we grow. And so, joining me now to talk about how to be a great dad, what has to come first, is Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. Devin, what are we missing before fatherhood can be really effective?
Yeah, I think that good question, first of all. But I think before we do fatherhood, I think we need to be sons of God the Father. And why I say that is because trusting sons make trustworthy fathers. Dependent sons make dependable fathers. Sons who trust the Father's love will be able to express the love of God the Father. And so the key here is I don't have my relationship with God the Father right as a son of God. If I don't really believe that I'm chosen, that I'm desired by God, that I'm delighted in by God, and that He has a real plan for my life, then my fatherhood's really going to be lacking because my sonship is lacking. So really, at the bottom of it, the basis of everything is our divine sonship.
I think it was really profound what you just said. Trusting sons make trusting fathers. And then I think you said reliable sons. Is that what you said? Make reliable
Yeah,
fathers?
dependent sons. Yeah, dependent
Dependent
sons make
sons.
dependable
Yeah.
fathers. Yeah,
It's
yeah. And
something to ponder. And I think a lot of people listening right now, you might pause. I've heard this said before, man, I'm not there. My husband's not there. Are my kids, not going to do well? There's always that question that's
mhm.
thrown out there. And we'll touch on that in a moment, Devin, because I think it's important. I hear it so often. You hear about the great elements of being a good father, but what if my husband isn't there? And we'll touch on that in a moment. But for those fathers who are listening now, how can you
Mhm.
be excellent? It's by taking yourself and putting yourself in the context of the relationship that we are born into in this world, that is being for you a son, and understanding to the depths of what that means even greater before God.
Yeah, so true. We have to understand the essence of this relationship. And really, as guys, I feel this pressure quite a bit. There's the pressure to perform. There's the pressure of competition. We're doers. I mean, it says that St. Joseph rose and did as the angel Lord commanded, and Mary, she said, let it be done. So there's this kind of difference between men and women a lot of times, is that deep in our psychology, we want to fix the problem. We're very solution oriented. And so that we get on that train. And there's a lot of pressure a lot of times for us there. And then a lot of times we come up lacking, or we feel inept or insecure in trying to achieve and be more. And and there's a reason for that. I think is there's at the basis of it, the devil is inflicting the father wound, and that father wound is you're never going to be good enough. You don't have what it takes. You're just basically you're sponging off of your existence, and good for you. But the devil is trying to inflict that father wound, usually through a person of authority at an early age, to try to weaken our confidence in God. That's the whole thing. He wants us not to trust in God, because if we don't trust in God, then we won't risk. If we don't risk, then we will not do great things for the Lord. That's his whole game plan. So he wants us to cover up. So God has created each and every human being to be a manifestation, a revelation of his glory. The devil wants to inflict a wound in some way, either attacking our human nature or attacking us in the fact that we have the divinity living in us, God living in us, or maybe even our kingship, this ability to master ourselves. He wants to attack us in these areas so that we're ashamed of ourselves. And so when that suffering occurs, That's the real testing ground for the son, because there's the son who runs when trials and tests and tribulations occur, and there's a son who remains. And the son who remains is the true son. And if you can become a son who remains, and you begin to see that God is doing something great in your life, and he's working through this pain to bring about a more perfect you, then you'll be able to translate that message to your children with courage.
You make me think of the story that we heard this weekend, the parable about the prodigal son that Jesus Christ presents to us. That son who, before his father's even dead, says, "Hey, Dad, give me my inheritance," which is normally done after the father would die. And he goes off, he lives a wild life, ends up poor, is a Jew who then ends up, or the Jews are listening to this as Jesus tells a story, and here the prodigal son ends up working with the pigs in the pig's pen. And to a Jew, that would be so scandalous. Like, he fell as low could be. And we know even to this day, the attitude with regard to eating kosher and not eating pig meat, pork.
Yes.
And so this story is like he's at like the lowest point, and then he comes back to his father, and his father is waiting. He was watching for him. He welcomes him with open arms. He accepts the apology, but doesn't even let his son finish. And I think that that's part of this story, is even if you've been on a different path, even if you feel like, man, I've been a terrible father for, X so many years, or, I've not been a father. Maybe there's an abortion that's been experienced within the context of your relationships with women. And, there's a child that isn't here today that, you maybe cooperated in an abortion or didn't have a say in that. God can forgive everything and anything, and you can have that good relationship with him to be a good father now or in the future.
Yeah, amen. I mean, Jesus Christ, the Word of God, did not become flesh and become one of us. And by the way, permanently fixed to flesh for all eternity. He doesn't take that robe off when he gets to heaven. He's permanently one of us, consubstantial with his divinity, but he's permanent, or homeostasis. He's one with his divinity. But the point is he's permanently one with us. He didn't do all of that just because we were good. He did that precisely because we'd sinned. And so our sonship is not based on our goodness. Our sonship is based on his love. That's simple. And I think we see this at Jesus' baptism. Jesus, at his point in this life, he has done nothing as far as public miracles. There's nothing notable, stupendous about Jesus' life. But God the Father pronounces, when he comes up from those waters after he's baptized, "You are my beloved Son. With you I'm well pleased." Why? Because you're my son. That's it. Because you're mine, and I'm yours. And see, this is the key for all of us. It doesn't matter how much you've sinned. It doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. If you recognize that God the Father loves you in spite of your sin, if you can recognize that and accept that, that's where all the goodness flows in your life, because then you begin to live a life of thanksgiving. You want to make a return to God because he's forgiven you this incredible debt. I remember looking at a crucifix one time, and the thought came to me was, look close and see what thy sins have caused, but look closer and see the love with which they're forgiven. And so it's a both and. We need to look at the cross or look at Jesus and see what our sins have caused. Yes, deicide, God's death on a cross. Yet we look even closer and we see this massive, infinite love that's burning in the heart of Jesus, that he will do anything and everything he can to save us from the pits of hell. And it doesn't matter if you've been a murderer, it doesn't matter if you've had abortion, it doesn't matter if you're currently contracepting. God wants to deliver you from that. That's the whole point of his incarnation and his resurrection and the life that he gives. And that's why we can rejoice in being sons of God, because it's through our baptism that the Holy Spirit now lives in us. And now we have the power, with God living in us, to defeat sin. But it's based on trust that the Father loves us.
So, Devin, I think the big question now is, and if you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. That's Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. Devin, the practical question is, well, where do I start?
Okay. This isn't going to be exciting, but where do you start? With prayer. But it's more than just prayer, like praying, Hail Marys and Our Fathers. It's actually getting up in the morning in the darkness, in the silence, and going out, whatever you need to do, go to some special place in your house, wherever, and just be with God. And start giving him 15 minutes of your morning with 5 minutes of silence. And usually what I recommend to guys is read the gospel, read until something jumps out at you, a word speaks to you, and then just talk to God about it, reflect on it, and then respond. Talk to God about it, and then tell him about your life, your wife, your troubles, your anxieties, your stressors, your aspirations, and begin to have that conversation with him. You do that for 30 days. You do that for 30 days, and you will begin to feel the God the Father's love. You will begin to know that he desires you, that he delights in you, and that he chooses you. That's the first step. But it takes trust, because you have to trust that by showing up, God's going to show up, and he will. Even though you might not feel it at first, you'll begin to discern his voice in your daily activity. You'll be able to discern what he's doing and see that he's moving and he's changing your life. And so it begins with the relationship, not the rules, the relationship. It begins with embracing silence and being with the one you love.
And taking that time for prayer. That is so important. That's what I think every man loved when he was a child, and even as an adult, if he has a good father, that time with his father, that time you can have with God the Father. And I think that's so important that we're seeing that. And it's so practical. You start with prayer in the morning, silently opening your heart, diving into sacred scripture, getting to know and see God the Father. Devin, a very practical question I often hear is we talk about the depths and the importance of fatherhood. Maybe there's a wife or a mother listening right now and she goes, well, okay, are my kids screwed? They don't have a good dad, or they don't have a dad, or maybe their dad isn't there. He's not quite there. And I'm praying for him, and I'm praying for him every day. I hope that should be your first go-to rather than complaining to me about what you're hearing. What can that woman, that mother, that wife do?
Well, that's a great question. Very difficult question to answer, because there's so many different situations in these marriages and these relationships. So we don't know why the guy isn't responding. But what I can tell you is this. I remember one man who, he's a great guy. He just carpenter, mechanic. He did all this. He's just a very talented guy. A lot of different stuff for us, and just loved him. But he's a man's man. And I asked him, I was like, hey, why don't you go to church with your wife? Why don't you go to mass? And he said, I tried that, but it just wasn't good enough for her. Then she wanted me to do this, and she wanted me to do that, and she was wanting me to go to this Bible study and that. And he said, I just turned it off. And it was very interesting, though, what happened. She recognized that. This is years later. He told me this. She recognized that. She stopped kind of nagging at him about this, let him have his own journey while respecting him, and then he entered the diaconate. he came back to the church, entered the diaconate. So there's something to do, and I don't have the answer here, but there's something to do with respect. Because that's in Ephesians 5. If you read Ephesians 5, that's the need of the man. Wives, respect your husbands, and husbands, cherish your wives. And so I think that obviously I believe that the man really has to begin that process but when he has a woman, a wife who's so beautiful in her faith, who's praying, who's sacrificing, but without nagging and without being critical, that can open him up to Christ's love. He can start to see, even in a sense, she's an image of the Blessed Mother who didn't nag at Jesus, didn't nag at Joseph, but simply asked, simply loved. And that's just a beautiful kind of attraction. It's the law of attraction and the law of gradualness. The law of attraction is if you want somebody to be attracted to God, you be attracted in your godliness. You be attractive. The law of gradualness is don't expect everybody to do it right away. You got to just wait on them and be patient.
That's Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. And just a couple of thoughts to add to your excellent response. I think of the early church, and we read the writings of, for example, St. Peter and St. Paul in those epistles after the Gospels, we see where it's actually said that vast numbers of women were converting to Catholicism and their husbands weren't. And they are instructed in what to do about their husbands who aren't converting to Catholicism. And the whole depth of scripture is talking about how it is by how you honor, respect, love, cherish, and by that example you set. And I think that that's such a good challenge. I have a friend of mine who her husband isn't Catholic, and she said, "Man, it makes me a better Catholic the fact that my husband isn't, because I have to work even harder to set that example, to pray that one day he will convert." And I think of another story. A friend of mine called me yesterday sharing the incredible news, saying, "I'm so excited. After nearly 50 years of sitting next to my mother in the pew, my father's finally converting to Catholicism." After nearly 50 years, here he is in his 70s, and she was sharing with me the story. She didn't want to, kind of get too excited, so she said that she hadn't shared with me that he had entered into RCIA about a year ago, and with no plan of necessarily converting, more so as a means of discernment and learning. And she talked about how, from her and her siblings to her mom, they just left him be. They let him go through. They didn't pester him about whether or not he was coming into the church. They said, "Hey, we're going to leave you be. You're doing this. We understand that you're not necessarily coming in. This is just," and then we encouraged him, she said, we encouraged him, "Go to RCIA. You don't have to make a commitment, but just learn more." And he, lo and behold, without pestering, but instead with faithful, persevering prayer and example by his children and his wife, he eventually ended up converting. And so I think that these are really good examples, I think, for the hope that can be seen in fatherhood. And perhaps you find yourself, your kid doesn't have a father. And this is what's so wonderful, is we can bring good male role models into our kids' lives, or good female role models. If your child doesn't have a mother, to help expose them to people of the same and opposite sex in various places in their lives, to set a good example. And this should be something that all of us are bringing into our lives, not just if there's an absence of a parent. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. It is our weekly Gentleman's Hour. If you have a question, the number is 1-888-914-9149. That's been Devin Schadt from the Fathers of St. Joseph. Find him and his incredible community for fathers at fathersofstjoseph.org. That's stjoseph.org. We'll include links in the podcast notes for today's show, which you can find wherever you catch your podcasts, or at relevantradio.com/trending after the show today. I want to take some questions, have you do with our weekly Gentleman's Hour. Any question goes. Asking a couple of questions here. First question came from James on Instagram. He asked, "How do you know what the right time is to ask a girl out?" I was just laughing really hard before we even came into the show, because I was talking to my producer Jim about, asking people out, and what the timing is, and whether or not someone's intimidated. I was like, why wouldn't you just ask the person out? If you're interested, why wouldn't you just ask? And I think there's so many excuses and reasons for why we don't do the very thing we want or wish we could do. And I say it's excuses because there are always roadblocks. We can have a victim mentality. It could be rejection in the past. It could be fear. It could be any number of things. But to answer this question, how do you know the right time to ask a girl out? When you're interested and you'd like to date her, just ask. I can't tell you how many people I know have said, "Oh, I like this person for like 6 months, a year. I haven't asked her out." And finally, everyone's saying, "Just ask her out already." Well, the guy finally asks her out, and lo and behold, when he finally asks her out, "Oh, I just started dating someone. I just got into a relationship." You can miss out by waiting too long and not getting over your own fears. Now, that said, time to not ask someone out, please, gentlemen, listen to me. If you had deep seated addictions, that everything from sexual addictions to substance abuse addictions, that's not a good time to ask someone out. That's one just real big, red flag. If you're struggling with looking at pornography, check out resources and our friends at integrityrestored.org. That's integrityrestored.org to work on that sexual addiction, whatever it might be, to heal so that you can be in a good place to have a healthy and wholesome relationship. You will be better in the relationship, and so will that person that you're desiring to ask out. But otherwise, if there are no roadblocks in your own life, just ask. Don't be afraid. Okay, the question came in, follow-up question. Patrick's asking, how about when you're going through a major life change, like a new job? Is that a good time to ask someone out? It's a really good question. I think it really matters on what your stress level's at. If you're, stressing about something and it's, this kind of a crisis-esque situation and you're feeling pressure to ask the person out, you feel too busy, that's a really good moment to pause, because I think any decision that is rushed is that moment where you need to stop and slow down for a second. If you're making a decision out of being rushed or a lack of peace, I think that that's a good sign that you just need to pause and really reflect on that a little bit more. So I hope that helps to answer the question, because it's a good question. It's funny. So I've had a toothache. I had some dental work done in January, and I've had this achy tooth, and it's like shooting up into my jaw, my whole jaw. I'm getting headaches from it. And I had this dental work done 1 week before we put an offer in on our house. And then lo and behold, we packed and moved in like 25 days. And then we moved, and I had family visiting and traveling, and I'm having these headaches and this ache in my mouth. And on one side, I could make the excuse, and I did, that I didn't take care of it because I was too busy. I was feeling stressed. It was just one more thing. But that's one of those moments where, like, is this a high priority or is this a low priority? What is the risk if I don't ask this person out? Like, is my tooth like probably getting infected up into my head and I'm having massive migraines and can't function every day? Or is it just a dull ache and a lot of discomfort that I can manage for maybe a month or whatever it is? You take that to the dating relationship. How this turned into an analogy about my tooth, I have no idea, but it just came to mind. I think that is at the heart of it. Would this woman be here who you're deeply interested in 1 month after you settle into a new job, you go through and move, or whatever that major life change is? If you know she's not going to be there and you're taking a risk by waiting, then take the risk and ask, even though it's maybe a difficult time. Or maybe communicate, hey, I'm in the middle of moving or just getting a new job. I would like to take you on a date, but can we plan it for 1 month from now? Because then you're showing that you're being intentional and honorable and are truly making a commitment, even though you're communicating clearly early on that this timing is a little off. Great question, Jem. Is dating like a toothache? I don't know. You tell me, gentlemen. So I think some people might think that's the case. Okay, another question that I thought was a really good one. John emailed and asked, what signs signal to you as a woman that a man is a true gentleman? I thought this is a fascinating question. Okay, I'm going to take it surface level. Like, if you barely know the person, maybe you've had a couple interactions with them, it's not someone who's a friend or someone you can reliably learn about them from someone else to know, their past relationship dating profile, or to know, what they're like day to day. I'm assuming this is someone who is just becoming an acquaintance and you don't really have any information on them, because let's be real, ladies, we do our due diligence when we're looking at dating someone and other people know him, right? So here's the thing. I think a few things that stand out to me if I'm trying to figure out, okay, is this a solid human being to possibly date or set up with someone else, would be things such as, is his language clean? If he's someone who's cussing all the time, it shows to me he has a lack of self control and maybe even an anger issue potentially. Grant, cussing is one thing that a lot of people struggle with, but I think that that's a really quick sign for me. If I'm hearing bad language, it's a red flag right away that maybe there's control issues, anger issues, etc. Two, I think that it's really easy to be a nice guy, but not necessarily a good guy. And so watch out for someone who is just nice but not necessarily good. So it's great when someone's polite and chivalrous and opening doors. Those are really good signs, but also pay attention. Is he intentional? Does he keep commitments? Is there a depth to him, or do you feel like there's something maybe a little off? Do you do your due diligence and Facebook stalk? you can Facebook stalk, but I don't think you should put too much weight on what you discover on Facebook. However, if there are obvious red flags on Facebook, rather than you reading into something, that's a great way to eliminate a potential dating candidate. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. We'll be back and we're going to talk about breaking news coming out of Disney, an internal meeting that video was released from that you need to know about as a parent. And even if you're not a parent, you need to hear what's happening with Disney. This is breaking news and hardly anyone's talking about it.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, I want to invite you to join me. If you haven't ever heard of it, Consecration of Saint Joseph is so profound. Many people over the last few years have turned to consecrating their lives to Saint Joseph, similarly to how you consecrate your life to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Consecrating your life and trusting yourself to these saints, the parents of Jesus Christ, in entrusting yourself to them for their intercession. 100% abandonment that they will take you to Christ. They will intercede for you through Christ. They will teach you about Christ. I think that this is such a important devotion that has always been a part of the church, but Father Calloway wrote a book, Consecration to St. Joseph, a few years ago. We'll include links in the podcast notes for today's show to this book. And I made my first consecration to St. Joseph about 3 years ago, and my husband and I have repeated it each year. This will be our third year. And today we're starting the consecration of St. Joseph again to make consecration, reconsecrate to St. Joseph on his feast day, St. Joseph the Worker. Why am I telling you about this? Because so many of us struggle. We discussed yesterday the crisis that women face in a feminist culture where we identify with our career and with our degrees rather than the great gift and potency of motherhood, and how we are made for relationship. We're relational human beings, but we identify ourselves according to what we do rather than the depths of who we are. Well, St. Joseph helps us in, especially in light of his feast day of St. Joseph the Worker, in properly contextualizing work in our lives. We discussed yesterday on Trending, I hope you'll listen to the podcast, that we should not live our whole lives to work, but we work to live. That is, that we work so that we can continue to strive and excel as human beings, not just in a workforce environment, but as human beings in all dimensions, especially in the relationships that we are called to as human beings. So, consecration to St. Joseph, I'd like to invite you. I'll be sharing little tidbits about St. Joseph every single day, starting today. And one of the things in today's consecration readings had to do with understanding St. Joseph's name. And this is one great reason to inspire you to consecrate your life to St. Joseph, to his intercession. Is St. Joseph's name in the Hebrew, Yosef, actually means increase. He's been known in the tradition of the church as the increaser. He duplicates, he grows, he increases what we have, who we are, the virtue we have. And so by consecrating your life to the intercession of St. Joseph, he grows your work, your family, your provisions, that career, your virtue, your faith, far more than you could by yourself. He's a foster father of Jesus. He stands before and knows Jesus Christ in heaven, and he can intercede before his son for you, teaching us how to get there, how to conform to the great commandments and will of Christ his son. So I hope you'll join me again. Check out the book. It's an incredible devotion. Even if you don't start today, if you start a couple days from now, it's easy the first couple days to dive in and catch up. I hope you'll join me. I'll be sharing tidbits on St. Joseph. And if you have any questions, I'd love to take them on St. Joseph. Feel free to write me on Instagram. Just find me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Okay, so I wanted to share with you the breaking news that no one is talking about, and that is over the last couple of days, video footage from an internal meeting at Disney. Disney, who makes everything from toys, TV shows, movies, fun at amusement parks, to you name it, games, among other things, that Disney, who your children, I, along with many of you, grew up watching your entire life, from the Disney Channel to the movies to the feature family movies every Sunday night that used to be. Was it on ABC or CBS? I miss when that was like when we'd watch a movie as a family. One time a week, we'd get together and watch on ABC that Sunday night Disney movie. It was fun. It was for the family. Instead, we all watch movies separately on our own devices, completely isolated from any accountability, and just assuming that all the content's okay. Well, why do I bring that up in part? Well, because you need to hear about this, what's happening coming out of Disney. A couple weeks ago, you may have heard, I shared with you that the Disney CEO, Bob Chapek, actually called and contacted Governor Ron DeSantis. Why did he contact the governor? Well, as you've probably heard, people are referring to a law that was officially signed into law this week by Governor DeSantis that would essentially protect kids ages 3 through 8 from hearing about LGBTQ ideology in the classroom. It would keep LGBTQ conversation out of kids' classroom for ages 3 through 8. That's pre-K through 3rd grade. So this was signed into law. This is a bill that was very controversial. Some people called it the Don't Say Gay bill, as if this was bullying people who identify as anything having to do with the spectrum of LGBTQ. But instead, what this was about preserving parents' rights and making sure that LGBTQ conversation didn't occur within the classroom with kids age 3 to 8. Now, this bill this law barely even scratches the surface of what should be done, but it's at least preserving kids age 3 to 8 from hearing a conversation that is profoundly sexualized. Now, what does this have to do with Disney? Well, the Disney CEO a few weeks ago, Bob Chapek, actually called, and this was confirmed, Governor Ron DeSantis' office, asking him to back down essentially from this bill, vocalizing his opposition to it. Now, since then, what this shows is that Disney's drawn a line in the sand. They actually scandalized me by this call, because what they said is Disney, who we know is in the business for kids, Disney is in the business for sexualizing kids, given that they want 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds to hear about the LGBTQ ideology. What is LGBTQ? It has to do with sexuality. Let's be clear here. That's why the curriculum implemented in my home state, from California to sweeping the nation, having to do with the LGBTQ agenda, whether it's so-called LGBTQ history or coloring books, all of it is sexualized and not age appropriate. It's scandalous. But then here's what happened this week. Videos were released showing that countless employees in Disney, and you see them firsthand speaking because they're on this video call, and the video call is all about their opposition and their goal as a company to see this law repealed. Why is Disney trying to see a law having to do with 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds repealed that has to do with parents' rights and making sure that conversation, essentially about inappropriate conversations about sex and sexual identity, don't occur in the classroom? Why is Disney doing this? Well, because it's been made very clear from writers to top level executives at Disney. In this call, they share things such as one person working on the show, The Proud Family remake, which I remember was a show when I was a kid and is being rebooted now. Well, one of the writers or the workers on that show was talking about how basically they're adding queerness anywhere she can. She said, basically adding queerness anywhere I could. She said she, wanted to do this when she came to Disney. People kind of warned her off, so she tried to do it, somewhat discreetly, but then no one made a big deal about it. And so she's been peppering in so-called queerness, that is 2 men kissing or 2 women kissing, not just as background characters, but as leading characters right in front of your kids' eyes for little kids, 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds. Another said that they've been intentionally placing gender, quote, non-conforming characters in their content, from, again, little kids shows to movies. The Disney corporate president Carrie Burke actually commented saying he would like to see a minimum of 50% of the characters being LGBTQ or another minority. 50% of the characters having a adverse sexual lifestyle that is portrayed on television for your kids. We're talking about kids. And this is why, as an organization, as a company, Disney has the goal of seeing that law repealed that protects 3-year-olds to 8-year-olds. Let's be real. Let's tell the truth about the human person, created intentionally, male and female, with a purpose, not meant to be reduced to our sexuality. This is so important to tell the truth to our kids and to push back against Disney's agenda. Are you single, looking for a date, wanting to make a change, but wondering what's happening with dating relationships? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Why are men getting more picky, and how can women be less intimidating to men? I'm going to be joined by celebrity and royal matchmaker Christina Pineda, giving us lowly peasants her advice on how to make romance happen. Join me Thursday for our marriage hour, 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.